Hello, good evening. Thank you for that introduction. I'd like to start by thanking Friends Forever International for giving me the honor of being the Eileen D. Foley Fellow this year. I've been with FFI for nearly a year and a half, in which I've participated in 3 programs, which you just heard a little bit about, but I'll talk about a bit more. I started with the nationwide program in July of 2022, spending 2 weeks in Newcastle with 7 participants from around the United States, including Ade from Texas, Gio from New York, Anna from Tennessee, and Gabby from Venezuela and now Florida, just to name a few. We came together to face our fears and challenge our limits, whether that meant doing a treetop ropes course to challenge a fear of heights, or doing nighttime bonfires to get more comfortable with the dark. Then, this past February, I was a part of the first credit-bearing program where we focused on empathetic debate and nonviolent communication. Lastly, just a couple weeks ago, I completed my second credit-bearing program where I and 14 other New Hampshire participants spent a week aboard the Dennis Sullivan, which is a 140-foot-long sailboat, sailing around Massachusetts and learning about compassionate communication, astronomy, and ecology. As I've completed these various programs, where I've learned more in a week with FFI than in an entire semester at school, I began to ask myself, what does it really mean to be a student? Well, technically, being a student means to be formally engaged in learning. But I can tell you that from my experience in today's school system, that's not what being a student is like at all. And I can guarantee that if you ask any high school student in America, they'll agree. In my own experience of being a student, I have found it to mean studying only for the test, just to forget it all in a week to make room for the next one. It means, it means taking the hard classes to improve my GPA, even though I'm not interested in the material, and beefing up my college application by joining at least a dozen clubs. Most importantly, I have found that being a student means learning whatever I'm told to learn for 8 hours a day, listening to a lecture or filling out a packet, going home, doing hours of homework, and then repeating the cycle over and over and over again. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate most of the harder classes I take, and I truly enjoy the majority of my clubs. My issue isn't with them. I don't even take issue with school itself. I relish learning and exploring new things. I love that part. What I take issue with is the astronomical amount of pressure placed on students to always be the best at everything, to never compromise or settle, get 100 on the test and win the soccer game, to be at the top of your class and be class president. Oh, and don't forget to get in your community service hours on time. This kind of pressure isn't just unreasonable, it's dangerous. It is this kind of pressure that, for nearly 2 years, drove me to routinely stay awake for multiple days at a time, running off of a ridiculous amount of caffeine and a craving for academic validation. I figured that this could be the way that I could get it all done. It is this kind of pressure that furthered my development of various eating disorders over the years, in part due to all of the stress that I was facing in school. This kind of pressure fueled my 5-year-long self-harm addiction and battle with depression. And when this kind of pressure became too unbearable, I attempted suicide twice. It was on the heels of a plan to take my life that I attended my first program with FFI, which was not only life-changing, but also life-saving. In this completely different environment, with a team focused on self-improvement and real community service, I found myself rediscovering my passions. Although I was still struggling, I was inspired to do more, to help others and my community, and to build relationships with my team, to take all of the skills that I learned from the program and spread them to others in my life. Then in February, just weeks after seriously planning to commit suicide and 4 months after my second attempt. I attended my first FFI New Hampshire credit-bearing program. This is where my perspective really changed. Not only was I back in this magical, atypical environment, but I was seeing firsthand the possibilities of education outside the classroom. School didn't need to be a panic-inducing nightmare because education wasn't meant to be a matter of life and death. These revelations completely shook my outlook towards academics and my future as a whole. To provide some context, for the majority of high school and for the majority of my life, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. This was partly because I'm interested in so many things, it seemed impossible to choose just one thing to focus on. At least that's the part that I tell people. While it's still true, the main reason I never honed in on a future career was because I never expected to make it past high school. Going into the February program, it was becoming increasingly clear that I would likely be around for my graduation, and I needed to figure out my plans for the future. I considered what I enjoyed most in my life, and I realized it came down to two things: learning and helping others. I reflected on all of the support given to me by a couple of amazing teachers and mentors at my high school. Shout out to Miss French and Mr. Suoth. Not only did they unknowingly save my life, but they showed me what it means to be a real teacher, to actively and genuinely help others grow and learn, not for some test, but for their own development as human beings. I realized that I wanted to be that person for other teens and students who were struggling as well. I entered the credit-bearing program with this new epiphany, which defined my experience, as I viewed the program not only from the perspective of a student, but also from the perspective of a potential future teacher. I saw the ways education could exist outside the four walls of a classroom and saw the value of life skills developed beyond the standard curriculum. When I said before that I've learned more in my time with FFI than in a full semester in school, I truly believe that. Except I have found what I've learned at FFI to be more valuable than anything I have in school. I find myself using life skills I learned with FFI, such as conflict resolution, compassionate and nonviolent communication, vulnerability, empathy, and reflection on a daily basis, and implementing the components of recipe into everything I do. I adopted FFI routines like journaling, Valley Hike Peak, and I still think buen provecho to myself before every meal. In the future, and I do have a future, whether I'm teaching in a classroom or a program like FFI, I hope to bring these same skills to future students. As a Friends Forever alumni, I'm proud to be a part of the change that is happening to provide more opportunities for unconventional education for students across the state, country, and around the world. While at FFI, I developed my own definition for a student: to be engaged with your curiosity. But I also developed my own definition of teacher: to support others in their curiosity. Tonight, when you go back to your everyday lives, I implore you to strive not only to be a student each and every day, but to also be a teacher for those who need it, because you never know when you could be giving someone a future who never planned on having one. Thank you.